What's going to happen when I die? If I met God in the unlikely event after I died, I think the first thing I'd say is, well, which one are you? Are you Zeus? Are you Thor? Are you Baal? Are you Mithras? Are you Yahweh? Which God are you? And why did you take such great pains to conceal yourself and to hide away from us?
Converted Man here, and today I'm going to be looking at a series of comments and exchanges that I've had with one particular YouTuber. But before I get too much into that, I want to talk briefly about ad hominem attacks. This is a logical fallacy sometimes produced by people when they really have no actual argument. Instead of attacking your arguments, they instead attack you, the person, in efforts to derail the conversation. And what this harkens back to is the video I did talking about different dialogues. Heuristic dialogue, the goal is to verbally knock out your opponent, and the goal is to reveal the deeper basis of that conflict. As I said, I don't really think you can win one of these dialogues because there might never be an arrival at what that is. What is the cause of this? And although we can guess at this, it really is something that logic doesn't address. What is that goal? What is it that we are arguing about? And if we go off to argue in that manner, I just don't think we'll ever get to the goal, or the chances that we will get to the goal are very, very small. And so I'd rather focus on persuasionary dialogue and engage using logic. So with that in mind, I'm going to be ignoring the numerous ad hominem attacks that this particular YouTuber has made and focus entirely on the argumentation provided by them and analyze that as best as I can. This conversation with EastanAirport all began on my video response to the teleological argument presented by Robin. In that video, I deconstructed the logic and awaited somebody to correct the logic. Well, he never did that, but instead said that he had a paper that concludes that a theistic deity is the only explanation for the existence of dark energy. I PM'd him asking for this paper. Being a skeptic, I have some critical questions about the origins of this paper. Where does it come from? Where did he find this paper? How do we know the people that published it are atheists? He said all three people that were involved in writing it are atheists. In fact, as far as I can determine, it hasn't been published. I'm not sure if it has or hasn't, so again, where was this located? Why hasn't it been peer-reviewed by other scientists? These questions are important to answer and haven't been answered yet. Also, this paper is 11 years old, and we know that science updates quite often, so why such an old paper? It seems awfully like cherry-picking to me to find one paper that might be written by atheists to support your conclusions. But all of that aside, I thought I would give the paper a fair go and search it for mentions of deity or God, both of which are not in this paper at all. Having failed to get to the core of what this paper is about myself, I thought I would search for one of the authors of this paper and just simply ask them what it was about. Unfortunately, looking for the first author here, 1L Dyson, in both of the universities that they're reported to be from, has yielded 0 results. L. Dyson is not a faculty member of either of these universities as far as my search determined. So, who is this person? What are their credentials? This single paper that has not been, as far as I can determine, published or received any peer review from scientists is not something that qualifies for evidence in favor of the teleological argument. It's nothing more than cherry picking, and my critical questions about the origins of this paper must be addressed before we can take it seriously at all. Having moved on from this to a whole new argument, EastanAirport has said to me that he's already won the teleological argument because this single paper proves the case of the teleological argument. Okay, it doesn't. It's nothing more than cherry picking, but let's just move on. Instead, he sent me a modal logic paper that tries to prove God. Interesting. I've not had a chance to see many modal arguments for God, and so I thought it was a new argument at first until I got home to really study it in depth. It's actually an argument I've seen before, it's just presented in a way that I haven't seen. This is nothing more than a transcendent argument for God, or TAG. I have seen these arguments before, and this one actually isn't new. It's presented in a different way, but it's not new. Be that as it may, does it have logical fallacies or not? If not, I'll have to believe in God. I will be compelled by the system of logic to conclude that it is reasonable to think that there is a God. And this argument tries to argue for a Trinitarian God. So, if correct, I would have to believe in a Trinitarian God. Now, there is a problem in EastanAirport's idea that that would make me a Christian, because there are more than one Trinitarian gods out there. There's 3,400 different gods to choose from, and a few of those happen to be Trinitarian concepts. The Christian God is not the only God out there that is a Trinitarian concept. But still, he would be closer to getting me where he wants than he is now. He says a lot in his private message to me that I want to share with you and talk about. I said the system of science is stronger than the system of logic. His response to that was that, ironically, that's not a statement of science. I never said that it was a statement of science. It's a statement that I'm making that I happen to think reflects reality. I could be wrong. Perhaps the system of logic is less than the system of science, or equal to it. Let's look at those counterexamples. Logic is used to analyze arguments and decide if the conclusions are logical or unwarranted. Logic cannot be used to find if something is true or untrue, real or unreal. Logic cannot test things. Science is used to analyze anything we find in reality and decide what that thing is that we're analyzing. Science can be used to find if something is true or not, and we use the system to determine if a conclusion is false or if the conclusion can be verified as true. So science is doing something that logic cannot. I would think that that would give a good reason to say that science is greater in that regards than logic is. EastanAirport then tangents off into what naturalism says, and says that naturalism says we should only believe a claim that can be empirically verified. Well, that's not what naturalism says as far as I'm aware, so I'm going to mark that as outright lie, but he's free to show me where in naturalism it says this, and I'll admit that I'm wrong if he can do this. But let's examine that claim, because he says, well, that claim itself can't be empirically verified, thus we must dismiss it. Didn't we see something similar to this a while ago with that whole extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence thing? Doesn't saying, well, I need evidence kind of suggest that, yes, we do need evidence for things? Other than playing word salad with what the words are, maybe let's analyze it using logic. Just an idea. Let's look at the counterexamples. We should only believe a claim that can be empirically verified, versus we should only believe a claim that cannot be empirically verified, or we should believe claims that are empirically verified and claims that are not empirically verified. Those are two counterexamples to the first sentence. So, let's look at the idea we should only believe claims that can't be empirically verified. If it's true, anything goes, as long as it's not empirically verifiable. Any statement, if uttered, if clever enough, would be true. I have an invisible and undetectable dragon that will destroy you if you don't do whatever I tell you to do would be true, as it's not empirically verifiable. Thus, under the assumption that this statement and this way of reality is the way that reality is, that any statement that's not empirical is true, we could make the statement that we must have empirical methods to decide if something is true if we're saying that that statement is unempirical, and thus with our counterexample that we would only accept statements that cannot be proven to be empirical. In our counterexample, we could still make the statement that we need empirical verification to be sure of statements, so this counterexample doesn't work to contradict the original idea. What if number 2 is true? We certainly do seem to believe in claims that are not empirically verifiable. In religion, there are claims that are not empirically verifiable that people do believe in. Perhaps the question might be, should we believe in those things? And that's an interesting question. But still, if it is so that we can believe in claims that are not verifiable and we can believe in claims that are verifiable, then the original statement that we should only believe a claim that is empirically verifiable is still, under that idea, something we can utter and be true. Both counterexamples to it fail to produce a negative result. Thus, the statement that was originally uttered, that we should only believe claims that can be empirically verified, is what's known as a tautology. It is true under every circumstance, and there is no circumstance where it is untrue, and we have worked out the counterexamples to prove that that's the case. If I wanted to just do word salad back, I could say something like, this sentence that I am about to utter is exempt from the rule that it is going to give, and the sentence rule is that we should believe only things that can be empirically verifiable, and as I mentioned, it is accepted from that rule, and there you go. Now you can't play word salad with it. I've given a special clause that protects it from doing that. But there's no reason to do the word salad, and there's no reason to play games with words. We can use logic to decide whether a sentence is tautology or not. All that out of the way, let's finally get to the modal argument that he's presented to me. Now, I don't think that he came up with this himself. I think he found it on some website. But it doesn't matter where he got it from. If the logic stands, then the logic stands. Here is the first modal that is used to argue for what he is trying to conclude. Now, I can tell you a number of things about this. First of all, I can tell you that the formula is correct. There's no errors that I detect in that formula. The second thing that I can tell you is that it still has a premise and is still subject to the rules of informal logic. The premise relies upon if there is a thing called perfection. If perfection is not a thing that really exists, then none of this argument matters. The rest of the argument fails because this particular counterexample was never dealt with in the rest of the modal argument. Perfection is never shown to be a thing. Thus, I can be skeptical of the rest of the argument, and I don't even have to bother with talking about the modal logic or what the formulas mean or any of that, which I could, but it's just not necessary. All the formulas are fine, by the way, but they still have to ultimately rely upon premises that we can check against reality. And in this case, the word perfection is something that I don't know if it exists in reality or not, and it is your burden to show that it does. I think that the problem here with EastanAirport and others that I have talked to, trying to debate with them, is they might believe that we are in a symmetrical dialogue, where one person has to prove position A and the other person has to prove the negation of it. the idea here is that the theist must prove there's God, and the non-theist has to prove there is no God. Well, the case is actually not that. We are in an asymmetrical dialogue, where one of us has the burden and the other merely has to be skeptical. As a skeptic, I merely have to be skeptical, and you share the burden on your shoulders. I do not say that there is no God as a certainty. I simply lack belief that there is one. I could be wrong, and I'm open to the possibility of being wrong. What's interesting to me is that many don't allow themselves to ever be wrong. If I may, let me tangent to a real life scenario that happened. I was talking to this older gentleman, and he was telling me about his friend and how he's reading the Quran and how his friend believes that the Quran is the word of God. And then he mentioned the Old Testament and how you can tell the Quran's not based on any of this. And I said, well, they're all mythology. And he said, oh, no, the Old Testament's true. Well, his friend is in the position of believing that he's right, and perhaps he is in the same position as his friend. If we're not willing to consider the idea that we might be wrong, then can we ever be wrong? Logic makes it that I have to be open to being wrong. I would love to encounter a theist that holds this position as tightly and as honestly as I do. I still have not seen a logically coherent argument as to an airport, and your paper does not prove what you think it does. Rather than continue to hurl ad hominems at me, do the research and be intellectually honest as you implored me to do. I've analyzed your documents that you have sent. Your arguments fail on one or more points, unless or until I have a logically coherent argument. I must continue to be skeptical of your claims. Number of logical fallacies is something we forgot to do. I didn't count them this time. Well, I gave the logical fallacy counter a break from last video, and I guess it just says forgotten to come back to work. That's alright. I promise I'll put it to work in the next video, where I talk about resurrection myth number 1, contradictions in the Gospels. I'm sure there's absolutely no contradiction. Hold on. Hello? Hi, how's it? Oh, bleep!